back to the table. The mighty mortise that's going to hold these breadboard ends on. Let's start hogging out the material. I start by plunging down 1 3/4 inches on both sides to mark the beginning and the end of the mortise. The mortise thickness rule is 1/3 of the thickness of the wood the tenon is on. So my tabletop is going to be 1.5 inches thick, so 1/3 of that is 1/2 inch. And that's what my mortise will be. I then start hogging out the material like a typewriter, left to right, only taking off about 1/4 inch of depth. Then, carriage return, back to the beginning, and start the process all over until I get a required depth. I chose an up spiral router bit that, when cutting, causes the waste to be pulled up and out of the way. Next, I had to make a routing jig to keep the top and bottom aligned on the breadboard so that when I put the breadboard on, it'll have no gaps in the top and bottom of the joint. After that, I then drew the line where the edge of the jig will need to rest. I then had it adjust and align the jig to the top, made sure it was square, clamped it down, and then started routing the tenon. Bite only a little off at a time here, as trying to hog out too much can be dangerous and can lead to tear out when you get to the edges. My wife and I flipped this table so many times I lost count, but to give her props, I thought I'd show 1 or 2 of those said flips. The tabletop was massive, at about 150 pounds, so hats off to her. So you can see how this jig works. Keeping the top joint in line with the bottom joint allows me to simply flip the table over and start routing the other side with perfect alignment. When the breadboard is in its final resting spot, the top and bottom joint won't be skewed at all, which is key for gapless joint. So much sawdust that is created by the removal of all the waste. Looks like my shop had a snow machine and I wasn't working in the winter wonderland. Now that I got most of the waste removed, it was time to fine-tune the tenon fitment. Starting with my jack plane, I continued to remove the rest of the waste for perfect fit. I was a little shy on removing the initial waste with my router because I didn't want to take off too much and be in a bad situation with a loose joint. So I had to take off a ton of extra material in the process. Since the router has a round bit, I needed to round off the corners of the tenon to fit the mortise. So I got my handy dandy chisels out and went to work. The first tries of many at the fitment of this tenon, as I figured it was just too tight. Time to start shaving off more material. Okay, let's try the fitment again. Nope. Still need some more off. Okay, time for the nifty thrifty block plane to see if I can get closer to the shoulder of the tenon. Well, why didn't I just get to the shoulder plane as the choose for squaring the tenon shoulders anyways? Okay, yet another fitment test. I told you I did like a bajillion of these when doing these breadboards. One tip here when doing breadboards, cut them about 3 inches longer on each side so you can use a rubber mallet to remove them when the fitment's just a bit tight. Then when the breadboard is finally fitting where it should be, cut it to length and install one last time. I kinda got stuck here as you can see, as I'm looking at the tenon like it's a Rubik's Cube. After countless fitments, I couldn't figure out why the breadboard wouldn't fit. So, back to the shoulder plane, as I could see there was just a little bit more stock near the shoulder that needed to be removed. Okay, so I got out my digital calipers and measured to the 1,000th of an inch to see how far off I was. I concluded I needed more off the tenon. I don't show how many times my wife and I flipped over the tabletop, but what you don't want to do is shave only one side of the tenon. So you need to take a little off, flip the table over, and take about the equal amount off the other side. Okay, almost there. I noticed on the last fitment, the tenon was bottoming out on the mortise and it was slightly a bit longer at the edges. To alleviate this, I chamfer the edges of the tenon. Okay, finally got it there. Instead of showing the same process on the other side, just rinse and repeat, as it's the same process that we did on this side. After getting the breadboard nice and ready to be installed on the tenon, I cut it to final width, which is about 6 inches. Then it was time to drill the holes where the dowels would go. I'm using a popular technique called draw boring. Basically, it's the two holes the dowel passes through, the tenon and the breadboard, are a bit offset. This causes the two pieces to be pulled together when hammering the dowel into place. There are multiple reasons to use draw boring. For this piece, I use them because I don't have clamps this long, so I can use draw boring to pull the pieces together using leverage rather than clamping power. I highly recommend it for any project that requires dowels, as they not only strengthen the connection, but they also ensure a tight dowel fit. We can't forget about wood movement over the seasons, especially those of us living in the North and Mid-East United States where it goes from 10 degrees and dry to 100 plus and 90% humidity. So we have to make sure there's some degree of gap in the dowel that will allow this horizontal wood movement. So I file all the holes except for the middle. I only add glue around the center hole as, like I said above, we need to make sure we don't cement the tenon to the breadboard together, as it will crack when given not enough space to move during the seasons. Much like I do when I go to Costco at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. Breadboard installed, now it's time to play an easy game of whack-a-mole with the dowels. If you look closely, you'll see the power of the draw boring, as the offset holes will pull the breadboard end closer to the shoulder, and you'll see the gap kind of disappear. Okay, the glue is dried enough for me to cut the dowels off flush to the tabletop. I use a flexible flush cut saw in the back of a piece of sandpaper to make sure I don't scratch the top when sawing. I then get my block plane and smooth out the dowel's end grain, which matches it up perfectly to the top. Remember when I said to make sure your breadboard ends are just a little longer than the width at the top? If you do remember, now it's time to cut them to final dimensions. To cut them, I align a straight piece of wood to the edge of the top. This allows my handsaw to ride up along it, making sure that I'm cutting both down and straight to the edge of the top. Now this would be much easier if my trusty plastic workbench would stand still. With the top pretty much done, it's time to start with the finishing touches. First, I like to add a chamfer around the whole table so that it's not razor sharp. To connect the base to the top, I decided to use some threaded inserts with bolts and washers. To do this, all I had to do was recess a hole in the bottom side of the top of the face. I didn't like using the pre-stain stuff that Minwax makes, but since I used it on the base, I decided that I didn't want the color to be mismatched because I didn't use it on the top. So here I am applying pre-stain. If it were my table, which it isn't, I would have left the natural wood color of the red oak to show its legs. However, English walnut is the new color. I'm happy that my family was kind enough to help me stain this top in freezing temps, which is another thing that isn't recommended when finishing anything. I had to check on this like every 2 hours when drying as it was taking forever in such cold temperatures. Okay, it's delivery time. My son was having a fun time supervising, but can get very demanding with this stick he likes to carry around. Now it's time to pack up the trailer with the hard-earned work. Just needed to make sure everything was going to not get damaged or moved on the delivery down to Raleigh, North Kakalaki. And that concludes our broadcast. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already subscribed to the Brits Woodworking channel, be sure to click that button right now. Also, support your fellow woodworker.